What's going on, golf fans? It's your boy Gsluke here with our fades and sleepers for this week's Charles Schwab challenge. Gonna break down the game theory side of things, a little ownership reaction for you guys, and bringing you three of the more overhyped and overlooked players of the week that you should consider when going through and building those PGA DFS lineups. Our fades, of course, the guys that are getting in a little bit too much steam closer to lock here. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we've got ourselves our sleeper plays. There's diamonds in the rough, guys being a little bit overlooked, disrespected by the masses out there that you might want to consider adding to your lineups. So without further ado, let's get this thing rocking. We're going to start off with our fades this time, and first up, we've got Cam Davis, who is a darling after his Sunday performance at the PGA Championship, but this isn't really his sort of track. I love going after Cam Davis when he's a low-owned pivot play at a golf course that rewards the ball striking, and this week, while you are going to get rewarded with your iron play, off the tee, it is much more about your positioning than anything else. So for a bomber like Davis that has more firepower than most, if not every single player in this field, I can hit it pretty much out there with the Rory Cam champs of the world when it comes to that carry distance. Can't really utilize that around this sort of golf course. And I've heard people talk about how, this track is becoming a little bit more antiquated. They can go out there and hit driver a little bit more. There's truth to that, but it's extremely hard to hit the fairways. And with how small the green surfaces are, you need to have that spin to be able to access a lot of the birdie looks. I don't know if that's the best strategy. I've seen a few people pull it off over the years, but a vast majority are doing it the traditional way, right? Going out there, hitting a bunch of fairways, probably only hitting 4, maybe 5 drivers any given round, and leaning into that iron play and the putting. And sure, Cam Davis can be a little bit streaky with the iron play, but he is not the best putter on the PGA Tour. He tends to be his best self on bent grass, which I think is part of the reason that so many people are playing him this week, but I really worry about him not being able to lean into that driver. So just to give you an idea, we take a look at his shots gained metrics. He's doing almost all of his work off the tee, right? Gaining 0.6 strokes per round. Everything else is in fact a slight negative. So if he goes out there, he hits almost every single fairway this week. I think there's a real avenue for him finding success, but it's a real narrow avenue, right? He's got to go out there and put on a master class with the driver. You look at the last 12 measured rounds, right? Just to maybe zoom in a little bit more on how he's been playing of late. He's still gaining a bunch of strokes off the tee, but maybe a little bit more well-rounded elsewhere. So if you're looking at the last 3-4 events, you're probably really impressed with a Cam Davis, but the more longer term that you look, the more question marks that come up. I don't love the fact that he can't lean into that off the tee play as much as he could at other golf courses, and the fact that he's 14% owned when you've got a bunch of guys around him that are in that 5 to 7% range, just makes him egregious chalk, right? He's 2, sometimes 3 times higher owned than all of the guys around him, and you can't tell me that he's that much of a better play to go out there and succeed than some of his counterparts. So for me, for the game theory perspective, makes him a relatively easy player to go out there and cross off. Next up, we've got ourselves in here towards the bottom end of the 7K range, so we don't typically find a ton of chalk down here, but Hayden Buckley is getting steamed up by everybody and anybody. And unfortunately for Buckley, he's another one of those players that gains a bunch of strokes off the tee. In fact, if we take a look at his last 36 rounds, if he threw out his off the tee play, well, he'd be a loser to the field, right? Is a slight gainer on approach, neutral with the putter, and loses quite a few strokes around the green. If we take a look at the last 12 measured rounds, again, zoom in on it, you can see the iron play gets a lot better. So over his last 3 starts, he's been electric with the iron play, with the approach play, which is why a lot of people are getting here. But once again, right, I'm much more of a long-term sample guy. I like looking at a player's baseline. Form matters, right? It helps me choose, especially some of my lower-owned plays, but I always have to question myself when somebody's going to be, look at this, 10 times higher owned than a Billy Horschel. And it's not just Billy Ho, right? He's twice as owned as a Bo Hostler, 4 or 5 times higher owned than a Maverick McNeely. And he's in fact right around the same kind of ownership as an Eric Cole that long-term I'm much more bullish about this week, right? From the other end of the spectrum, right? He's not a huge gainer off the tee. Everything else, he is long-term one of the best players in the field. So those are the kind of pivots that I'll make, right? If there's 2 guys that are chalky in this range, well, I'm going to take the one that I think fits the course better, right? And I don't have a magic ball. I don't have a crystal ball over here, right? There's going to be guys, even if a bunch of the shorter hitters succeed, that go out there, also get in the top 5, top 10 that are bombers. right? There's always going to be one or two guys that do so. But when I'm looking at players that are the same kind of ownership level, the same kind of price, I'm always going to take the one that I think has the better chance of succeeding. And based on my modeling, the kind of correlations of going after in my lineups, I'm trying to stack up a lot of the players that I think are better from fairway in. It's just one of those lay up off the tee kind of golf courses. And I've heard enough people out there spewing the narrative about it being a quote unquote bombers week, which I just completely disagree with, that I think that you're going to get pretty decent, pretty, I would say, moderate ownership numbers on some of these guys that I think should be mega chalky out there. So for me, I'd rather play the Eric Coles of the world. Obviously, the guys that are 4 or 5 times less owned, like a McNeely, half the ownership on a Hostler. I mean, even guys like a Nick Taylor, Ryan Palmer, that are getting some steam this week are significantly lower owned than Hayden Buckley, about half the ownership level. So I would rather play pretty much all of those other guys. Davis Riley, throw into the same argument. Thomas Dietrich, who is getting some steam this week, is still significantly lower owned than the Buckleys of the world. So that's why he's just somebody that I'm crossing off my personal list. Next up, we've got our sleeper plays, right? So enough talking shit about players. There's a reason why these guys are getting ownership, right? Buckley, Cam Davis have been striping the ball of late. I understand it. But maybe a little bit more interesting are taking players that aren't in the best form, right? There's a reason why they're a little bit, lower steamed, why they're not getting all the attention that some of their counterparts are. And Siwoo Kim definitely checks that box. He's not been playing particularly well of late. If you take a look at the last 12 measured rounds, you'll see that it's been kind of just meh, right? Not gaining with the putter, right? Solid from tee to green, right? Still gaining across all 3 categories. But when you compare him to some of his counterparts, I mean, Chris Kirk, you throw into that same kind of argument. He's also going to be relatively low on this week. Everyone else has kind of been striping it. So, if you're doing modeling, if you're just a casual looking at some of the box scores, you're definitely going to side towards some of the guys below him here. I mean, you got Fleetwood Rose, who are mega chalk this week. Sanjay, who I told you I love this week, but also relatively popular. And then these two sandwiched in here. So honestly, I could have talked up Chris Kirk as a sleeper play here too. I decided to go with Siwoo because of the upside. Siwoo Kim is excellent from fairway in. He can struggle from time to time off the tee. Of late, though, he's been unbelievably accurate off the tee, which I think could be a huge advantage around this kind of track. He's had success at Sedgefield, Wyndham Championship. He said that's his favorite golf course on tour. It plays very similarly off the tee to what you're going to get this week. He's a very solid short iron player, one of the better wedge players that you get in all of this field, and I think has the upside to go out there and succeed. The issue is the putting. He's not particularly good on bent grass. He's not been particularly good with the flat stick of late. And that's why the ownership is lower. That's why he's not gone out there and torn up every single field, right? That's why he's been a little bit inconsistent over the last 2-3 starts. But he's half the ownership of some of the other guys. I mean, sometimes even 3 times lower owned than some of his peers around him, like a Ricky Fowler or a Tommy Fleetwood. And that makes him an exceptional GPP play. So it's a little bit speculative, right? He's not going to feel as safe as maybe some of the options around him, but this guy wins golf tournaments. He won this year at Sony, right? He's won American Express a few years ago. He won Players Championship. This is a player with legit top-end upside, even in a relatively strong field like we have this week. And lastly, we've got Billy Ho. I promised we'd get back to him. He's $7,400. And if you're looking for form, run the other way, right? There's a reason why he's only $7,400 now, and he's 1.6% owned. But I would argue that the course fit, that the area of the country he's had so much success in the past over here in Texas is indicative of maybe taking a shot on Billy Ho. So first off, one of my top comp courses is Austin Country Club. He went out there, had success this year. He's had success 4 of the last 5 years over there at the WGC Match Play. You got to love that, right? And that's my number 1 comp course this week. Also, it's not an off-the-tee heavy golf course, right? If there's anything that he can struggle with from time to time, it's that off-the-tee play. When you get him at a short track, like Mayakoba, for example, a few other courses where you'll lay up a little bit more off the tee, he tends to find a lot of success at those, and it shouldn't be a surprise, right? Let's look at the shots gained, and trust me, cover your eyes here if you're looking for anything good, right? Off the tee and on approach, he's been horrendous, right? That's why we've had him in this slump. But around the green and putter have still been there. And even over the last 12 measured rounds, which have, again, still been absolutely horrible, the short game is still there, right? He's always going to be a really good short game player, both around and on the greens. It's all going to come down to that ball striking. And this week, I don't want to say we can completely throw out the off the tee play, but I'm not worried about that for Billy at a Colonial Country Club. It's just not as important at this golf course. Historically, the metrics have bared that out. The approach play is what you have to worry about. And if all we have to worry about is that one part of his game to flip around, right? If Billy has a good iron week, he could finish top 5 or win this golf tournament. I've seen people betting him outright. I'm not that crazy, that bullish on him to go out there and do so. Maybe I'd throw a few dollars on him, right? Because I think he's like 150 to 1 at this point, I think. Something ridiculous. He might even be longer than that for all I know. But I more so like him in DFS where we don't need a win, right? A top 5 would be unbelievable at his ownership and price. A top 10, more than enough for some of those large field GPPs as a value play. And I would say even a top 15 is probably close to enough to even take down one of those large field contests. So $7,400, that's more what I'm looking for here, right? The median projection's not great, right? Compared to a Hayden Buckley, he's projected for 20 less points, which is huge, particularly if you're going through and building cash lineups. So I would avoid him in those sort of things. Even in single entries, I think he's probably a little bit too risky. But if you're playing 50 to 150 lineups, I'm playing 150 lineups this week myself, I have no issue playing him in 5% of your lineups, even 7 to 10% if you want to get a little bit frisky about it and really get a bunch of leverage to the field. It's these kind of spots that can win you one of those large field contests, right? Because when he goes out there, he finishes top 5, top 10 into somebody you have to take down a GPP. Only 1.6% of, let's say, the 50,000 entries are going to have him, right? And that's huge, right? That's putting you in a player pool of 1,000 or less entries, usually like 500 or less entries, to go out there and compete against for that GPP. And if you have him in 7 to 10% of your lineups, you have a large enough sample size to probably capitalize on that, as long as the rest of your pool is pretty decent, right? So those are the kind of spots I'm looking to take advantage of. We talked about Ben Griffin as a value play earlier this week. That's closer to like that 4 or 5% ownership mark. These are the kind of guys I'm trying to get 4 or 5x leverage to the field on. Whereas up top, right, you're probably getting at most like 2x leverage to the field. So I just wanted to point that out with Billy Ho, right? There's a lot of reasons why he's not getting the ownership this week. There's a reason why the price tag is where it's at. But if you're willing to eat that, right, willing to get a little bit nasty with some of your plays and GPPs, long term, these are the kind of things that pay off, right? It's every time you look at a winning lineup, an optimal lineup in some of those large field contests, there's always that one guy that makes you go, what the heck? Like how that guy get to that sort of player could very well be Billy Ho this week at the Charles Schwab. That is all I've got for the fades and sleepers. Before you hopping out of here, smash that like button, but also let me know your #1 fade of the week. I'm sure a lot of you are probably considering fading Scotty Scheffler. If you guys want my thoughts on Scotty, you'll have to catch them on the live stream tonight, but I would love to hear your #1 fade down in the chat and give me a reason why as well. As I was talking about, that live stream will be live in just a few hours here. That'll be at 7 p.m. Eastern time here on Wednesday. You might be watching this after the fact. If so, you can still catch the replay for that, but we'll be going through the weather on there, some DFS chalk, all of your questions, of course, whether it's for DFS or on the prop side, and making sure that everyone is prepared to go out there and crush it for this week. So best of luck with those lineups over there for DFS. Best of luck with any outrights that you decide to go with, and hopefully one of us, either watching this video or a part of my community on Patreon, can go out there and cash out in one of these large field contests. Would love to see it. Would love to get a few more dollars in our pocket this weekend. So best of luck out there, and I'll catch you guys for the stream later on.